at the good and the bad side by side, it's very clear that a binary has now emerged for this election. On the one hand, you have the multi-party charter with a vision for, and I quote, a new government to build a just, inclusive, and prosperous South Africa based on opportunity, freedom, and security for all of its citizens. On the other hand is the Doomsday Coalition, composed of state capture rogues, VBS looters, RET factionalists, and the most wanted from the Zondo Commission. It is in this binary that is shaping not only this election campaign, but I would advance shaping the future of South Africa. The side that wins nationally and in provinces like Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal will determine whether our country embarks upon a fundamentally better path or whether it accelerates down the road to ruin. In this binary environment, we've also started to see the emergence of spoiler parties that seek to exploit the coalition environment for narrow personal gain. Political opportunists who are not only willing to sell themselves to the highest bidder, but who are more than happy to actively undermine the rational opposition. To these mercenaries and opportunists, they live by the maxim of, these are my principles, if you don't like them, I have others. And this is a dangerous, dangerous political posture to adopt in this emerging binary political environment that we face in South Africa. South Africa will either emerge into a dreadful reality controlled by Julius Malema, Jacob Zuma, and others, or it will embark down a new path empowered by the multi-party charter. In this election, I believe a vote for the DA is win, win, win. It's a vote for the DA is a vote against the ANC, EFF, MK Doomsday Coalition. A vote for the DA is to keep the ANC and the EFF out of the most successful province in the country, the Western Cape. And a vote for the DA is a vote for a new multi-party charter government with strong partners that have a credible plan to know how to get things done. And so my call on to the people in this hall and to across South Africa is that on the 29th of May, vote soberly and vote like your life depends on it.
And for those of us who fear South Africa becoming a failed state, we should consider all the differences between us and those failed states, primarily in Africa. One of the most important differences in our favor is our strong private sector. We all know that the private sector, not only here but all over the world, can do things that the government simply cannot do. There are now hopeful signs that the government is beginning to accept that the private sector can help tremendously to solve some of our most pressing problems. Finally, we should accept that the majority of South Africans are good people and that our communities can be involved in creating solutions. And here I want to mention but one example. The Free Market Foundation had calculated that in South Africa there are between 7 and 11 million households where people own the structure in which they live, but they do not own the land. They started an initiative where private donors arranged for title deeds to be issued and handed to some of these people. Regrettably, after 10 years, I was told recently that only 10,000 of these title deeds had been handed over. And at the really negligible cost of, when it started, of 2,000 Rand per title deed. Now, I always shock people when I say that in one respect, I fully agree with Julius Malema when he says that what people do not understand is that black people also want to be owners. Now here is a simple method at relatively modest cost where we can make owners of 7 to 11 million additional South Africans. What a change that will make to our country.
There is a very short lag time between poor governance here and an immediate negative political reaction for the party governing the country. Country's in fact changed extremely quickly over the past 20 years. In 2004, the ANC and its kind of ideological allies would have commanded almost 80% of the votes in the country. And in this, and the sort of DA types under 20. I think the DA got 12 in that election. Freedom Front, others as well, but 12. In this next election, the ANC and its ideological allies aren't quite going to touch 60, and the sort of DA and its allies are going to touch 40. So 80 versus 20 has become 60 versus 40, and that is lightning fast political change. And if you drill deeper into the country, you make the change rate so fast that it might even be too fast. And we must be careful, as Bill correctly warned you, what you wish for when you talk about getting rid of the ANC, but you're not quite sure what you're going to replace it with. In urban areas, if we split the country into halves, an urban and a rural half, and they had separate elections. In rural South Africa, in urban South Africa, the ANC would now get 30%. The DA is bigger, just on numbers, than ANC there. In rural South Africa, the ANC is probably at double that, 66 or so. But that rural bloc is an older bloc, black people who obviously grew up as such in rural South Africa during apartheid. And that frame of reference is strong enough that a little bit of load shedding, 9 days without water, as Johannesburg has suffered through, not enough to move the dial. But find a person who doesn't have that living memory experience of the old regime, and what the polling is unambiguous about is where contemporary challenges override historical experience, support for the ANC disappears. And if you factor the mortality rate onto the older rural voting demographic and play that out over just 5 years, you take the ANC's current 40, and that's not a forecast of where it will end. It can go up and down still before 29 May. We'll take that 40 to closer to 30 or perhaps to 20. And what this all means, and it's a very good thing, so I'm really talking, and I'm going to continue, about countervailing forces in favor of the country's success, is the political system is working exactly as it was designed. Was designed to ensure that if we ever reached a point where the country wasn't well governed to the advantage of all its people, they would become the reform movement. So you don't need to look to business or Americans. Will they do something? Will someone do something? People are far advanced in terms of bringing about change. And that means there's a natural immunity built into our political system, which means we are in the fortunate minority of post-colonial emerging markets in Africa or South America. When they reach the end of that first political generation after colonial rule, will probably be able to change fairly peacefully into a new political dispensation that reflects the fractured social strata of our society. And that's what's going to happen to us now.
I dare say, let us indeed prosper together. So what do I see? Along with values, I want to make this case that indeed South Africa can prosper for all. That black and white, and by that I mean colored, Indian, and all South Africans, that we are all descendants of this great nation, that we recognize this, that we're endowed with such great assets, and with those, it's not just our minerals, our beauty, our people, but I see a nation where an economy can grow, and I can dare say, if we work collectively together as a people, because I know the question is going to be about coalitions, but it's not just a coalition of political parties. It's a coalition with business, civil society, so that we can deliver an economy that grows at higher than 3% and ultimately can put 2 million jobs in this country so that every household has at least one person that is working in that house. That's the motif. We have to build a nation where our young people start school and finish school. 40% of our youth drop out. I reject that. We have to be kind and look after the child in the womb as much as we do the child out the womb. And that means that for mothers who cannot feed their kids, I dare say we need to introduce a form of maternal grant that will make sure our kids are able to grow up healthy from the womb. Or otherwise our kids are growing up stunted. I dare dream of a nation where our young people can learn robotics, they can learn science, so that they can compete not only with those in their neighborhoods, but with anyone else in the world. I'll never forget this. I once went to Amsterdam, and I was shocked that in the middle of the night, I saw a woman cycling through the streets. I thought, what kind of country is this, where women can feel so free? But it reminded me of how abnormal our crime is in this country. And therefore, if we are to fix, we must ensure that women and South Africans can feel safe. That the color of your skin does not determine your trajectory, but in fact, your character does. That where we live in a country where our leaders are ethical, that public service is restored, a nation where our healthcare ensures that at a basic level, a mother can take her child to the clinic. I dare say it must be a land where each one can have a place they called home, where they can have a piece of land that they can grow in, to call home, to farm, and to manufacture from. I dare say we must be a nation at peace with ourselves, with Africa, and the world.
To hear my leaders still blame white people for the sins of apartheid, for what is wrong in this country, it's an indictment. We've been in power for 30 years. How dare we still blame? In Rwanda, in the latter part of the century, they had a genocide. 25 years down the line, the country is a prosperous country. Japan was turned around. You don't blame yourself for the incompetence of the ANC. I want to say to every white person here that, you know what? You must stop feeling guilty for the sins of your fathers, for the sins of your grandparents. It's time that we rise up, not as white, not as black, not as Indian, not as colored, but as South Africans, and build this country like the Springboks did. They are the epitome of an example. Nobody thinks about Kulisa as black, although he's black as the night, but you see him as captain, my captain. And that is how you build a country. Salute.
I said that the current South African cabinet is made up of clowns, criminals, incompetents. I think I threw in ballerinas as well. I can't remember why. That the South African corporate sector are cowards and colluders for not standing up and calling out evil where they see it, despite they could just read the Zondo Commission and say, fair enough. I even said that Eskom was being run by the mafia, supported by the ANC, before Andre de Ruyter said that on SABC. He called me last week to say we should work together. I said the SOEs have been destroyed by the ANC, by cadres, through general incompetence and thievery. I said BEE is theft, EWC is theft. I named names endlessly. I don't get invited to much anymore, by the way. I called Cyril, and I don't call him Mr. President or Your Excellency, I called Cyril spineless in front of Luthuli House when I marched with the DA and 4,000 others, and then got chased down the road by 50 people trying to kill me. And in every single one of these cases, I was one of the first, if not the first, to say so. And you may not remember, but 3 years ago, no one said boo to the ANC. It was this above reproach, liberation, Old Testament, as Sean Summers said, organization. And today, I promised my wife this is my last political activist speech, because it has put a massive strain on my family. I've enjoyed moments of it, but I'm not thick-skinned like those incredible politicians yesterday who put up with endless attacks and horrible situations. And you know the expression, if you stare into the abyss long enough, the abyss starts staring into you.
The point is that these businesses exist out there. There are hundreds of thousands of informal businesses who are actually doing relatively well, who're sustaining our economy. And those are the ones we should be helping. It's not about startups, about scale-up businesses. And we need to see how we can help them play against the odds. So in ending, I wrote this in the end of one of my books. The informal world is inhabited by tribes of survivors, of gassipreneurs, of tabletop traders, hawkers and hustlers, gassicos restaurateurs, spazeret superstores, and backroom rental barons. Go among them, give them respect, for they're the future.
If you are building or constructing a portfolio priced in rands, especially with the way the rand is going and the mismanagement of the economy, you run a very great risk of not being able to afford it. We see it already in places like Mauritius. I mean, 10 years ago, with the rand at 8 to the dollar or 10 to the dollar, you could buy a nice place in Mauritius for, let's say, $400,000 or $500,000. Okay, so that's 5-6 million rand. Due to the depreciation of the currency and the price rise in Mauritius, most South Africans, excepting the very, very rich, cannot afford even to buy a house in Mauritius anymore. Pay 20 million rand for a 3-bedroom apartment. That's why people are moving to places like Hermanus, and they've become captives in their currency boat. And that's the biggest danger of advising people. Where do you want to be? How do you see your life? And again, as financial advisors, we look at the global trends. We look at the economy. Undeniably, economy has been mismanaged. Undeniably, there's been theft of really trillions of dollars. I remember a conversation I had with the late Dr. Simon Murray from Alan Gray Orbis many years ago, and I asked him, we were talking about, Alan Gray was going offshore at the time, and we had a chat about Orbis. And I asked him, my first question was, I said, Doctor, what is the first thing that you look at when you look at investing in a country? And without question, he said law and order. First and foremost, law and order. And from there, they will look at corporate profitability, blah, blah, blah. And to me, that stuck. And this discussion was 15 to 20 years ago. And based purely on just law and order as a guiding light, you have to consider that South Africa is not a great place to put your money. And there's not enough time for me to go through the whys and the whys not and what's happening. But you are in a situation, the markets are telling you something. One of the statistics that I look at almost every Friday, what are the foreigners doing in our market? We had Ramaphosa in 2018. There was a bit of an uplift in the market. And I've got a slide. Yeah, unfortunately, we can't use slides today. But the headline of the slide, it was the headline of the business day. This is 2018, after the JSE had underperformed world markets for 10 years. On the 18th of March 2018, there's a headline in the business day that says, Old Mutual expects SA equities to outperform the global average. That was on TV. It was Bronwyn probably interviewed them on TV, and Old Mutual was bullish. And they basically said South Africa will be the best place to put your money going forward over the next 5 years. And that was on TV, and all the advisors went around saying this. We disagreed very strongly. We said, we just don't buy this. It's not possible. I did an evaluation last night. I looked at the performance of the Old Mutual Investors Fund, which is their prime fund, their flagship fund. It returned 4% per annum over 5 years, as opposed to world markets that average 28% for the Nasdaq, 21% for the S&P, 18% for the MSCI World. So this is the stuff that advisors have to deal with. You've got the media speak of the big companies who try to protect their businesses and try to convince people that everything is okay and alles sal regkom. But I don't see it in the facts. I look at these things daily. I look at the outflows. Since Ramaphosa came into power, more than R1 trillion has left the JSE, either the equity or the bond market. R1 trillion. So far this year, the number is 28 billion. So we're heading for another 100 billion rand outflow.
Just as context, I think we need to understand where we are at regarding the whole crime issue. And I wouldn't have shared it, but this morning I got a call from a few cops specifically in the Cape Flats, and just last night 11 people were shot and killed in gang violence. Last week 61, week before that 62. It's 123 people in 14 days. That's a war zone. So we can talk about policies and we can talk about a lot of historic things. But it's important that we understand we really need to change this. It's not just a political answer. It's not just a civil society answer. There are specific things that we need to do to change this. Something's got to give.
And a lot of what France has said about the prospects for South Africa, any good prospects, are underpinned by the massive resource that we have in South Africa, the natural resources. So let's start on that by asking you to picture 1 billion barrels of oil. 1 billion barrels. Imagine that. Imagine the energy stored within that 1 billion barrels. That amount of energy is equivalent to the 6 trillion cubic feet of gas that we now know to be beneath the soil of Mpumalanga. Trillion cubic feet, let me give you an idea of what that is. Another idea. When South Africa built Moss Gas in the 1980s, you remember that? Utilizing shallow offshore deposits of gas south of Mossel Bay. That allowed them to start a gas-to-liquid fuel plant which supplied tens of thousands of barrels of liquid fuel every day for more than 20 years. And that was done on a resource of 1 trillion cubic feet of gas. Under Mpumalanga alone, 6 so far. So what's stopping South Africa, which has the resources, perhaps in great quantity, from going gangbusters and extracting them as fast as possible? Well, a couple of things. One of them, of course, is government, and the other one is the Greens, sometimes working in tandem. This year, Parliament passed the new upstream petroleum bill that provided some certainty as to how government would regulate oil and gas drilling. It's not a great piece of legislation. We opposed it on 2 grounds, really. One, that there are racial set-asides in it, which we don't agree with. And the other one is that there is still a lot of latitude given to the minister to make decisions. And that's never very healthy to create a climate for investment. Oil and gas companies aren't too thrilled about the legislation, but they do think that it is within their parameters and they are pressing ahead. And there is more drilling planned to look for discoveries off the west coast. Another problem is Big Green South Africa, which has a number of very active anti-development environmentalist groups, which are often funded by money from abroad. They aggressively target any new oil and gas development and are given quite a lot of latitude by the law to stop or slow down projects. The problem being that what can happen is that it just becomes too difficult and too expensive for large oil companies, and they exit the scene, taking with them the promise of jobs and revenues. But that doesn't seem to be happening now with Total and Shell and various others. They do seem to be sticking to their guns and going through the legal processes so they are able to investigate these deposits. So I hope that you will agree, having heard all I've said, with my contention that we have a game-changing resource find on our hands.
We have a situation now where the police are unable to investigate the number of dockets that are being opened. So they have to take a decision as to which ones they're going to investigate. And there's no intelligence being applied in making that decision. So a docket which would be easy to prosecute is left lying on the side. And a docket which is going to be hard to prosecute and hard to investigate is worked on. And that is a problem because the criminals are getting away with crime. The clear-up rate on murder now is less than 7%, which means if I kill 12 people, I better stop because on the 13th person, I might get caught. And that is a problem. It means people are able to commit murder at a rate of knots without being caught. And the same applies to other contact crimes like robbery and rape and crimes like that. But the biggest crimes now taking place in South Africa in terms of rand value is fraud, white-collar crime. We're now covering crime. You're going to be shocked. We have done cases in the last 18 months involving white-collar crime where the profile of the criminal is white Afrikaans, male or female. Now, that's unbelievable. I've got two ladies, two sisters, who swiped 137 million from their employer over a period of 9 years because the employer had two sisters. You know, we talk about segregation of duties. Well, if you have segregation of duties to prevent fraud, you should also segregate family members, because when you have two sisters on either side of the segregated duties, it's cheers, they clean them out, 137 million. I had another case involving a guy, white Afrikaans male, who stole 35 million over a period of 10 years. And him and his family lived like kings and nobody picked it up. And the reason they didn't pick it up, because of the lack of segregation. That same guy was the IT general manager and he was an accounts manager for a large part of their portfolio. So he was able to clean his track as he went along. So I'm afraid crime in South Africa at the moment, it's not looking good.
Now let's look at South Africa. Things have gone wrong. So what kind of things have we got to do to turn that situation around? Well, if you look at a lot of the consultants, there are a few factors that they talk about what you need for the turnaround. And the first is you need a change in the leadership team. The people who drove the business into the ground cannot be the same as you know, leading it out. It's a bit like you need different skills to make money than to keep money. Okay, entrepreneurs are very good. They're concentrated. They go for it. They're high risk. That's how they made the money. Now you got to keep the money. Don't. That's when you got to be conservative. Different skill set. Okay, so we need a complete change at the top, and hopefully we're going to have that at the time of the election.
The gas discovery in Mpumalanga and KZN in the Free State is an important game changer, with a potential huge impact on the lives of South Africans. It is endowed with characteristics like a widespread deposit covering prospective areas of about 6,000 square kilometers. It's a voluminous gas resource, clean energy of about 96-99% methane with no hydrogen sulfide or carbon dioxide, local and a shallow deposit. And it is done without actually fracking. That's important because it is sandstones and shale. Natural gas has the potential to increase the South Africa's GDP of the country, as the same way as the discovery of gold and diamond have done. Natural gas has got that potential. However, natural gas is a basic product. It is devoid from any glamour or any glitter of gold and diamonds. Flaring gas at night in Amersfoort and in Volksstraat is a memorable experience. It's like as if you are in Durban or as if you are in Qatar. If we flare for you at night, the lights, then we will think they are volcanoes. Of course, the gas deposit is situated in the South Africa's belt, which is a network of infrastructure, such as the Lily pipeline, which runs through our tenements. We're close to the Eskom grid with a capacity, I think, of 49,000 megawatts. And Teta will probably correct me. That feeds into the coal mining, where we've got road networks around us, like the N2, which has got a huge traffic of diesel trucks. And of course, that is an opportunity for us to replace the diesel. This network can generate multiple streams of income.
South African stocks are under-owned and they are cheap. What did we say about ridiculously good investments? What do they look like at the start? They look like ridiculously bad investments. I think the table is set for a Lollapalooza outcome here. I do have some bad news. The bad news is today is not the best time to buy those stocks. It's a good time, but it's not the best time. The best time was 2 to 3 years ago, when we were all so pessimistic and negative about what was happening in the country. And I'm not being facetious when I say this. One of the BizNews community members put real money into the Merchant West Investments Value Fund, which I manage, and into a selection of offshore funds that a financial advisor proposed at that time. This is almost 3 years ago. The outcome from that date, and this is real money, these aren't made up numbers that I hope are right. Real money. At the end of July, the Merchant West Investment Value Fund was up 22% in rand terms, and the offshore selection of assets was down 3% in rand terms. Just because you believe the media and their stories, and you don't want to listen to Frans and Teto's stories, doesn't mean that South Africa has to be a bad investment. In fact, I think this party has just started.
The last time that big South African stocks like First Rand and Standard Bank and Old Mutual and Sanlam were this cheap was on the weekend of the 10th of December 2015, when Nene was removed as finance minister. So basically, that's where we thought we were. And the outcome, we thought, couldn't get really worse. I mean, obviously, the election did go in favor of what we wanted. But the truth is, you had an unbelievable opportunity at the time to buy equities in South Africa, basically where the mentality was that the ANC was going to rule forever and who knows who was going to be the president and everything was going to fall over. So as much as we all like to criticize, I think we're at a point now where we can say this has been a very successful year for South Africa. The GNU has just started, and although we read negative things again from the press around the education bill, etc., we are finding little small pockets of improvements everywhere. And actually, we're quite excited.